and welcome back to the Vulcan session at TADOS 2. This afternoon, we're going to have a panel of participants from the Vulcan Interoperability Bridge. But before I introduce the panel, I want to talk to you a little bit about what the VIB, as it's come to be known for, is, and sort of how we walked through this and where you can find the resources from it. If we can pull that website up, that would be great. I should have introduced myself. I'm Sandy Vance from this morning. I'm the program manager for the Vulcan Interoperability Bridge. So there is a website. I'm going to say the whole thing again. It is www.vulcaninteroperabilitybridge.org. And you can go out and find this website from the Vulcan proper site as well, which can be found at that QR code. But this is a microsite that we built as sort of an expose of the work that we did that culminated in June. The Interoperability Bridge was hosted by the Vulcan FHIR Accelerator, but in collaboration with both the Assistant Secretary of Technology and Policy and the FDA. So 2 federal agencies were engaged with this work from the very beginning as we were defining the use cases, putting together the end-to-end workflows, running the testing, and then ultimately doing the demonstration. The idea behind this came about in, I think it was in late 23. And actually, Hugh Glover in the room here was I think, his brainchild initially with maybe a few other of the Vulcan leaders. And the idea was that Vulcan has built 4 really powerful implementation guides to help people implement FHIR into their systems. But adoption seemed slow, and we were having a hard time getting people to connect-a-thons. And so the idea was that we would put these implementation guides in front of technology solutions providers, in front of pharmaceutical companies, in front of clinical research sites, so that they could implement them and sort of kick the tires to test run them and see how they were working for them. We intentionally excluded the implementation guide authors. For any of you that have implemented a standard before, you know that in a connect-a-thon environment, we'll have the project lead sort of show up and help shepherd people through the process of implementing. And we really didn't want that with the VIB because while we provided FHIR support, we wanted to make sure that those implementation guides were standing on their own 2 feet and that anyone could pick them up and implement them to get sort of the first 80% of the way through those use cases. So on your screen now, you see a number of people. These were what we referred to as our VIB champions, and they all did a yeoman's job of delegating technical resources to the projects, of helping us recruit additional implementers to come to the table and to find those use cases, and ultimately to really pull together the storylines and the demonstrations. If you'll scroll to the top of that site, please, and I just want to show the navigation bar, and then we'll get into it. So across the top, if you click on that demos, you can go to any of the demonstrations that we had from that link, and there's actually the recordings of them as well as the technical resources. So you can find the implementation guides that were used for them, as well as I believe the slides are out there as well. So the 5 case studies or use case areas, focus areas that we focused on, that's why we call them focus areas, were the internal sponsor systems, research site to sponsor, regulatory, the patient focus area, and health information exchange. And in each one of these focus areas, we strung together a workflow using more than one of the Vulcan implementation guides, and at times, other FHIR IGs like International Patient Summary, and there were a few others that were sprinkled in there as well. Okay, without further ado, if we can bring in our virtual panelist, that would be fantastic. So welcome, Bev, into the room. Glad that you are here. So I'm going to introduce our panelists one at a time and then let them give you a little bit of information about their organization, and then we'll get into the use case flows. So this is Beverly Buckta. Dr. Buckta has been establishing and leading global standards development for over 20 years and has experience with cytogenetics research in clinical settings as well as research and development in pharma as a director of information architecture in the Pfizer R&D Business Technology and Insights Group. Bev has been an early pioneer involved with Karolinska Institute, British Standards Institute, and a key contributing member in most of our HL7 FHIR accelerators, especially Karen, Codex, Genome X, and Vulcan. And she's also notably has led the Pfizer HL7 engagement team for the past few years. So we really appreciate her contributions. In her current role with Pfizer, she's leading interoperability and standards and medical evidence generation integrated evidence platform supporting real-world evidence and hybrid study plans as the Director of Standards and Interoperability. So I'll stop there, Bev, and just invite you to tell us a little more about what's shaking with interoperability at Pfizer.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for having me as part of this great panel. What we're doing over at Pfizer with interoperability actually has been throughout some years right now. We had started with a Pfizer engagement team where we started raising awareness internally about FHIR, about interoperability. We've built different FHIR apps, just testing and researching. These FHIR apps were, central with some research, some work we've did with OneSource. We've done other types of FHIR apps as well. And a colleague of mine, Craig Anderson, leads some work that's part of the Innovative Medicines Initiative, and also is one of the leads for what we call API on FHIR, which is part of the Vulcan Accelerator, part of HL7 Accelerator. Within that work, Craig has been working across several of our Vulcan groups, including several health authorities and ministries, as well as third parties. We have other pharma that's joining. So these are very large cross-functional teams that we've been part of. And we've also been participating in some consortiums, which are extensions of this, including the DCI network, where we've been doing some work, particularly in layering AI with the use of FHIR. We've had a lot of key learnings and been publishing some of those. But in particular, we've been trying to study how can we take what's particularly in the package insert and increase patient literacy with the use of AI. And one key finding we're finding is particularly circled around the use of ontology management and the use of the standards, because there is no room for error when we go to talk about drug and patient information on our medicines. So those are a few key areas that we've been busy with. We've even stood up a FHIR server internally because we're actually demonstrating with internal systems how we're able to triangulate across ontology management systems with our FHIR server and a lot of other feeder systems so that we can start to better harmonize data across our integration of our systems internally. So we're really trying to practice what we preach.
Awesome. Next, I'm going to go to Steve Hurd on the end. He's a Silicon Valley expat turned healthcare IT nerd, self-proclaimed healthcare IT nerd, and the Chief Innovation Officer at J2 Interactive. Steve has more than 20 years of work and leadership in the space of interoperability, FHIR, health information exchanges, labs, and public health research, having partnered with some of the most familiar and trusted names in healthcare. Steve's portfolio of technical architecture leadership includes some of the largest health data hubs in the United States, including the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, laboratories like Quest Diagnostics and LabCorp, and Partners AIDS Research Center. Outside of the United States, he has been instrumental in J2's work at the NHS and Dubai Health Authority, and he was one of the original architects behind Sweden's National Patient Overview. In his words, he is fluent in FHIR, but still dreams in HL7 V2. So, as J2, same dude, same. As J2 CIO, Steve is able to dive deep on both the technical and business operations of healthcare data while explaining these topics in ways that everyone can understand. Steve is instrumental in curating J2's internal talent and creating new technical resources for healthcare. He has been the driving force behind J2's involvement in the Vulcan Interoperability Bridge program and an advocate for emerging data standards. He's been a tremendous help, as have his team, and we're really glad to have him here. So Steve, do you want to talk a little bit about J2?
Sure. I think you did a great job of summarizing everything we do, and also as a nerd, I have a hard time bragging about all the things that we do. I'd rather just talk about the FHIR standards. As you mentioned, we've been doing interoperability for over 20 years. Some of the largest systems out there that have the most amount of data are U.S.-based health information exchanges, our federal entities. You know, when we do data interoperability and when we build databases of patient data in the U.S., they tend to get pretty big. And so I think that the experience that we're also bringing to the VIB and bringing over to this conference in this health information exchange space, I think it tracks really well with what I'm hearing about cross-Europe type collaboration, right? And it really resonated some of the things that I was listening to this morning. And I do like the part earlier today where they're talking about let's hand wave the technology, right? And get to the governance and, you know, just how do we make sure that the data is, you know, put the data first. And so we've always done that. It's a particular homecoming for me coming back here to Copenhagen. I actually did get to live in this area. As you mentioned, I worked on the Swedish NPO. And so, you know, coming back 10 years later and seeing that we're still working on the same problems and trying to find the same solutions, but, you know, we've come a long way. So yeah, I feel like today I'm here mostly to be an evangelist for the things that we do well in the US and for FHIR and Vulcan.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here. Next up, we have Dan Hyde. Dan Hydes is president and co-founder of Ignite Data, whose Archer product is the leading platform for interoperability of data between hospital medical records and the systems sponsors use to run their trials, commonly known as EHR to EDC, which was the use case that they demonstrated in the VIB with us. After Dan exited his first business in the patient recruitment space, he spent a period working within the UK's national health system, advising hospitals on how to effectively grow their clinical research programs. It was whilst working at King's College Hospital in central London in 2013 that he first saw the problem of manual data duplication that he has now built a product to solve for. So Archer is now in use on dozens of regulatory-grade clinical trials with many of the world's leading pharmaceutical sponsors and research sites. So Dan, a little more on Archer?
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, as you referenced, this whole journey that I've been on started nearly 10 years ago when I was working at King's College Hospital. And, you know, I believe successful businesses are built around identifying problems that can be solved through technology. And the bigger the problem, the more successful the business is going to be. And the problem that I witnessed firsthand at King's College Hospital was the duplication of data between systems, and it was a very powerful moment because the staff at the hospitals absolutely hated what they were doing. You know, a clinical trial is basically a large data collection exercise, and if that patient is lucky enough to make it into a clinical trial, you have this issue where the data coordinator or the data manager has to duplicate the data. They've got half the data they need for the trial will be in the medical record, and then they have to type it into an EDC system. So we identified back then that, you know, how can there not be a solution? How can there not be a tech solution that solves for this? In any other industry, it would have existed. And as soon as we started looking into it, we quickly realized why it didn't exist, because it was massively complex. But through, you know, perseverance and also through identifying HL7 FHIR early on, I think we saw HL7 FHIR in its infancy back in 2013, and we thought, if we're going to build something to solve for this, it has to be scalable. It has to be scaled globally, truly scalable globally. It has to be able to be vendor agnostic, so it can be deployed on any study at any site. And it was HL7 FHIR that we saw that was the common standard that basically made that vision potentially possible. But it was just too early back then. You know, it wasn't broadly adopted enough. The industry, we felt, wasn't quite ready for it. So we actually had to bide our time for 5 years while we waited for HL7 FHIR to sort of catch up with the idea that we'd had, and it's been a hell of a journey since then. But really, the value proposition is just so powerful for the sites and for the sponsors as well. You talk to hospitals who are doing this. It massively restricts the amount of research that they can conduct at a hospital. We do a lot of work with Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York, for example. I think they have 600 staff dedicated to manually transcribing this data for the studies that they run. They run 2,000 studies a year. They have reached a capacity of how many studies that they can conduct because of how massively inefficient this process is. So having a technology that streamlines some of that data automation for them was an absolute game changer for them. And it really, what it's about is getting data faster, getting accurate data to the people that need it, but ultimately getting drugs developed and to the patients faster as well. So I'll be happy to talk a bit more later.
Yeah, well, I think you're segueing sort of into what is the use case that you guys participated in during the VIB, and that particular use case was focused on research sites to sponsors and that interoperability between the EHR and EDC. You worked with a number of different partners in that use case. Do you want to sort of walk the group through that?
Yeah, sure. So the core version of what Archer does is built around structured data, so labs, vital signs, that sort of nicely clean, structured FHIR resources. What we identified, obviously, and for a large oncology study, that's typically half of the data in a clinical trial. But there's obviously a lot more data out there that's not in a clean, structured format, and a large part of that is AEs, for example. So AEs is a huge pain point for the coordinators entering the data, and there's safety issues, obviously, in terms of how quickly you can get that data through to the right people. The problem is that often AE data can be captured in all sorts of different ways, in notes, freeform notes. Epic, however, does have an AE module, so where that data is captured in a structured way. So what we did through the VIB was Vulcan had built the FHIR endpoints for AEs, and we were able to actually, through this program, take that work and pilot it on some studies at Memorial Sloan Kettering for capturing the AEs in a test environment. No one was really sure whether it was going to work or not, but suffice to say, it was a hugely successful project. The whole team, all the way up to the senior leadership at MSK, really it opened their eyes to what's potentially possible with technology of this type. It massively enhanced the work that we were already doing around the structured data sets. And now that work has gone on as a direct result of being involved in the VIB, to that being just about to go live on a regulatory grade trial with J&J. I've been told I'm unable to mention their name, who've been heavily involved in the program. So it's just a great example of how Vulcan has supported an organization like ours. I mean, quite frankly, without HL7 FHIR, our organization wouldn't exist at all. It is the common standard through it that the entire business model is built on. It's the thing it's the technology that makes the whole thing possible. But then taking it to the next level through the VIB program around AEs was extremely powerful.
Yeah, I think so. To give you all some more context, what we did was we brought a couple of different organizations together. We were actually able to test against MSKCC's instance of Epic. We were able to engage the FDA in receiving those adverse events in a FHIR format, which is something they're not quite prepared to go live with yet, but we were able to at least test that in their test systems. And so it was a wonderful opportunity for these Vulcan members to get to implement the standard and practice with the FDA, the regulatory body, and then to have them show up and say, this is where we're headed, this is what we're going to do, and these are the organizations that are doing that. So I would call this one a great success, and it was the end-to-end recording is available on the VIB website. So speaking of regulatory use cases, so Pfizer was engaged in a couple of different streams of use case where we highlighted some patient journeys in the regulatory space. And Bev, I'd like to just ask you to talk our folks through the use case that you narrated for the VIB.
Yes, happy to. So we did focus on the real-time exchange use case. This featured that electronic product information, or also known as drug labeling. What we were able to actually demonstrate, and we did this in partnership again with quite a few third parties. It was a village, as well as the FDA participation. And what we were able to show was our current way of actually passing a label, the way it's performed right now in the process is via email. By leveraging some of the real-time regulatory content streaming, the organizations can definitely stay ahead of the curve in this rapidly changing regulatory landscape via utilizing FHIR. So we were able to also show that when we take that product information and convert it to a FHIR format for interoperability, it helps also increase the data or the contextual quality. So we were able to demonstrate this kind of real-time, close to real-time update and enable some of the downstream applications with a structure for indication updates and other discrete areas of electronic product information, as opposed to what may typically happen in a Word or PDF document, which again is that current process today. So we did an overview where we actually were able to demonstrate a few things. One was the key area of interoperability, where these third parties or also e-health apps would be able to utilize this API on FHIR and start to layer in personalization as well. I think a lot of the shift with FHIR and interoperability is very much just focused on the patient, and for us to be able to do more timely updates on that label, as well as passing over the information in a contextual format, is very, very instrumental and beneficial. We were also able to demonstrate we could do visual dose instructions. So structured dose content can be used by some of the different apps, FHIR apps, to present it in a more visual and easier way to understand. We can, we demonstrated as well as a team the increased drug product detail. So again, shifting from that PDF Word type document, but being able to describe, a product SKU in alignment to what it's on the shelf in the supply chain, both with the product as packaged, as ready for administration for the patient, as well as making sure we encode clinical details like indication, contraindication, interactions, product images. And it starts to give us a foundation to look at polypharmacy, which is that idea of combining content with multiple products into one visually pleasing view. Why is that important? Well, several times patients may be on more than one medication, and this starts to give the ability to be able to look at that and better understand it. So we were, again, able to just show some of the increased efficiencies in terms of timeliness and, build it in more agile process with several different stakeholders, at the table.
Fantastic. So I think one of the things that we focused on was really providing each of the different groups of stakeholders. So technology solution providers, we've got 2 represented here. Clinical research sponsors, represented by a couple of different drug companies that were involved, and then clinical research sites. We wanted to have each of those 3 parties in each of the use cases, and we were able to do that with, I think, 4 of the 5. And then I think it was just tremendously helpful to get them together in the same room. And some of the things that we uncovered, as Bev talked about, those efficiencies, sort of, they came for this, and then they learned, more and more about how to expand on the uses of these different implementation guides, all while supported by a FHIR subject matter expert who was able to help them with some of those foundational FHIR pieces. So I think that worked out really well. All right, next up, Mr. Hurd. Talk about the health information exchange, your wheelhouse.
Yeah, so to describe what we did for the VIB, I should probably set the stage of what a health information exchange is, because it's I don't think it's a uniquely U.S. concept, but it's certainly the direction that we've gone in the U.S. for how we're aggregating data. So the point of a health information exchange, or HIE, which is easier to say, is to connect doctors and hospitals and public health agencies and patients and everybody in sort of a geographical area into one very large database or one very large system for exchanging data, right? So when you heard I think it was Marcos was saying earlier today about how, one country that he lives in, he can present in one hospital and they can have his data from another one. So that's the goal of a health information exchange. To try to do that and cover the entirety of the US population and geography would be very ambitious. And so most of our HIEs are regionally based. It comes down to the states. Nearly every state has their own HIE or is working on their own HIE. Some of them, as you can imagine, are very big, very large. For example, Healthix, who J2 were a technology partner of theirs, they have a patient population of 25 million people that just covers the residents of New York City. All right, so this is all in one system, though, where we're aggregating data. We're creating a unified care record for each one of these patients and kind of realizing on that dream of no matter where you present in your community, we should have some data about you, right? And this is clinical data that includes your labs, your allergies, procedures that you'd had. Most of what you can find in the EHR, the goal is to bring that all into the HIE, right? Once the HIE has this data, they can serve as, we call it, sort of a public data utility, where smaller entities in the community can rely on the HIE to see the full record for a patient, right? So in a use case where you need to, maybe you're at a behavioral health clinic and you want to see the full record of this patient, you have a data sharing agreement with the HIE, you can see now all of their clinical data without having to have a full EHR in your office. The other things that we do is we do real-time alerting. So anytime a patient that is in the HIE presents at any other hospital, people who have signed up to get alerts, they'll get an admit or a discharge or a transfer message saying that this patient has presented at their hospital, right? So the technology and the model that we use to build these systems, it's more than applicable to just the state HIEs, right? We also do this for very large healthcare systems or large hospital systems that say maybe you have 25 hospitals in your community and you have 25 EMRs and you need to consolidate them all. Maybe you've just acquired another hospital. They're on an entirely different EMR brand or vendor. You can use the same technology or the same patterns to aggregate all this data, use the patient matching algorithms that we've created for all this stuff, and run your own data that way. We also see this pattern that we're a technology partner for the U.S. Veterans Administration. This is another massive data set. So 9 million veterans are served across 147 different care centers throughout the country. All right, all of that data is consolidated into one system. This is the HIE data model as well. And at this point now, we're talking about billions of points of healthcare data across the Veterans Administration. So we are a partner with Manifest MX. So we were able to approach them for the VIB and see if they would be willing to come along on the ride. Manifest MX is the HIE for the state of California, or one of the HIEs that serves California. MX has been able to cover 90% of the population of the state of California. So that's 34 million people in their system. That also covers 144 hospitals, about 3,200 healthcare entities outside of the hospitals, 19 health plans, right? So in the US, healthcare is very much involved with the health plan that you have. All of this data is in this one massive system, right? So this is a very large HIE that we're talking about. If anybody wants to know the technical background behind it, corner me in the hall. I'll talk to you all day about the cloud computing and all the resources that go into a project of this scale, right? And then all the data governance that goes into a project of this scale. So for the Vulcan VIB, what we did was we partnered with the clinical research organization, and we said, give us a theoretical use case of what type of people you would be looking for, and we'll work with MX, and we will see what does it take from starting the stopwatch to having, of course, in a test system, getting the Vulcan IG, the FHIR implementation guide in, so that you can query the HIE for this data, right? And so the use case that we're given was men of a certain age who have prostate cancer but do not have end-stage renal disease and have currently taken one of 3 medications that I will not insult the pharmacists in the room and try to pronounce what they were, right? And use the Vulcan IG to use a FHIR interface to ask the HIE, do you have these patients, right? And it took our team, now our team is good, but it took them less than 2 days to implement the IG, to now have that bridge between this research organization and the data that potentially MX would have, right? And so the natural follow-up to this would be once you've established this pipeline and you show that you can do this real-time looking for data and get back what you need, anonymous, what you need, you can then put the data sharing agreements in place that you need to pursue the next step of, getting the data, pulling the data, bringing it into OMOP, whatever you want to do. So that was
And
what we
you
did.
guys used which Vulcan IG? Was it the real world data IG?
It was we ended up calling, yeah.
So, Steve, why do you think that it's so important to use FHIR for massive implementations
Yeah.
like this?
It's funny, when I saw the slide that you put up earlier this morning about FHIR, I realized we've been using FHIR for so long I forgot what FHIR stood for.
Right?
Yes.
Yes.
The FHIR. I've also endured so many FHIR puns in the last 10 years that I sort of put it to the side, right? But for us, FHIR was a game-changing technology, and I don't say that lightly. If you've been doing healthcare data for as long as I have or we have, that we didn't always play by the same standards that everybody else did, right? We did our own things. We did them all, for the right reasons, right? Very siloed data, or nailed VPN pipelines to get data that are in these obscure file formats that you then have to pay for a sophisticated interface engine to translate that data, and then you don't know necessarily where it's going to go. And for years and years, we built an entire business basically off of, and there were good standards out there. It's just over the years, people either corrupted them or they went off on their own and did different things. And so when FHIR came, before we even get into how good of a data model it is and how the community has rallied behind it as a data model, we have to recognize that it let our healthcare IT people use the same tools, the same patterns, and the same technology as every other developer out there, right? And so now if you wanted to hire into your hospital IT department somebody to work on data, you could get that classic, tattooed person in a coffee shop in Estonia who's, building web apps. You can now get them to work on your healthcare data.
And you'd have to
right?
teach them V2 or V3.
You wouldn't have to teach
Yeah.
them V2 or any other, EDI or anything like that. And so just by, and not to get too technical in it, but the fact that it's built off of the HTTP standard, right, means that you get everything out of the box that everybody had been working towards across computer science for the last decade, right? You get authentication, you get security, you get API management, you get self-documenting, you have all of the development tools now make sense to us inside healthcare, right? And that was wonderful,
Game
right?
changer.
Yeah, we never got to play with those toys, right? And it let us attract new talent. We have probably 200 people on staff that work in FHIR, and the learning curve to get them productive was so much quicker than it was before FHIR came around, right? And it didn't matter which particular interface engine you already knew, right? If you knew how to build software or if you knew how to work with data, you could be up and running, right? And it did mean I could hire somebody from a more traditional web development shop, right? Or I could hire somebody who just got out of college and was doing, data research, because these are the standards, right? So that's before we even brought in the model itself, right?
Yeah.
And then the work that went into refining the model and coming up with, okay, what makes up the basics from the beginning, the simplification of data types, the reuse of the data types, and all of the scaffolding that goes around it. I had the biggest smile on my face earlier during Hugh's presentation when he showed the documentation, right? The documentation for FHIR and the system of documenting FHIR and the system of doing the IGs is probably the most underrated part of the entire thing, right? You know, when you're working on a FHIR project, exactly what the documentation is going to be. You know that your tools are going to be able to ingest the IG. You saw that slide if you were in here earlier about how it's not just the documentation or it's not just the IG, it's the software that goes onto your server, right? The whole thing is just so elegant in its design, and not just in the stuff that came out originally, but now as we come up with these new things and we come up with these new solutions, I'm doing the exact same sort of thing on the, we're talking about Vulcan now, but I'm also involved in the Gravity project, which is social determinants of health, and trying to wrap around that big concept of stuff. So.
Yeah, I think I see Bev shaking her, nodding her head in agreement. I just want to give her a chance to comment on this because, in addition to adding to anything that Steve was saying that you want to, Bev, you've been involved in several of the accelerators, and I'd just like for you to speak to maybe the value of tailoring these implementation guides to clinical research.
Yeah, certainly. I'm relating to everything that's being said here because, when we look at, and in particular, the EHDS regulation, it really sets out some rules and governance mechanisms that help and relate to both that primary use of data, so that's the health data for delivering healthcare to individuals, and is very similar to one of the FHIR accelerators was TEFCA. In the U.S., which is a trust exchange framework. And that was very important because it put a bit more accountability, responsibility of third parties and every party actually involved in that patient's healthcare. And so it started to really, again, shift that focus to the patient. And that's really what healthcare is all about. So that TEFCA was particular in the U.S., but there's also other similarities in other countries too, like Norway and Sweden and others. So that's one kind of focused around that primary use of data. But when we also looked at EHDS, right, it's about secondary use of health data. So that's going to include that clinical trial data for research, statistical purposes, et cetera. So lots of impacts. But both these data uses have FHIR underpinnings for the interoperability that's in support of this. And I think one of the benefits with these FHIR accelerators in particular is that it kind of shifts our paradigm from, being able to hypothesize and theorize about what we could do, and really gets us into that testing and demonstration to really show and be able to brainstorm and demonstrate the realm of possible for research. And in particular, we tend to think of the clinical trials, but these also, when we think about some of the FHIR use cases under Vulcan as well, and we do get involved with Gravity too for social determinants of health. There's population health accelerators and so on. But what it really does is it starts to give us ways, particularly in these FHIR accelerators, such as Vulcan, to describe schedule of activities on FHIR. There's all types of areas where we could create more IGs or more implementation guides. and really help us to look at research not only in that interventional space, but also in the non-interventional space and low interventional space, even more so, and how that kind of comes together. So that whole idea of that integrated evidence planning. And it really, besides shifting that, focus to the patient rather than institutions, which I would argue it's been in the past, it does help us preserve the security and compliance of the data, because there's quite a bit around FHIR, around utilizing OAuth and different identification and authorization mechanisms. But then it also helps us get closer to the originating source of data, which to me in data science is very key, because the further away we are from that data, the more, I like to say, hops away. The decrease in data quality comes with more hops. So by getting closer to that data and really eliminating the needs for so many data transformations, we can then really get better data quality. And with better data quality, it's better analysis and decisions to help patient health. So I would definitely recommend, to really take a look at the various FHIR accelerators that are out there, but in particular with Vulcan focused on research. I think is very, very key, focusing on that patient.
Thank you. Okay, Dan, so can you circle this up with maybe what the impact of having this common language has been for your organization?
Yeah, happy to. So I'm not deeply technical. I look at things more from a business perspective. And when I was looking at the business model for EHR to EDC, it was obvious that the benefits to all the stakeholders were enormous. Reducing timelines, getting the data 70% faster, getting 100% accurate data essentially versus 8% error rates, keeping staff happy, increasing the capacity of hospitals to conduct more clinical research, making the hospitals more attractive to run more clinical research. But that all sounded like this wonderful nirvana that we were trying to get to, but then you examine the problem and you've just got this many-to-many mess. And that's part of the reason why no one had tried to do it before, right? It was a horror show, like how on earth, if even two hospitals that are running the Epic, their instances will be different utilizing different ontologies. It's just this mess. So it was essential that you had a common standard that could make some sense of that, certainly on the source side. And it's when we saw HL7 FHIR, even though it was in its infancy, that it was just that light bulb moment. It's like, wow, we just can't entertain the idea of doing point-to-point solutions. We're not interested in on-prem stuff at all. This has got to be scalable globally. It's got to be in the cloud. And it was quite literally HL7 FHIR that made it possible. Without that, our company does not exist, right? So, but it's also the scalability of it too. Even practically, we demonstrated that it could work through deep partnerships with our pharmaceutical sponsors and our hospital sites. But it's really the 21st Century Cures Act in the States, mandating the use of FHIR, has seen our acceleration in America really leap way beyond any other territories. But we're seeing other countries catching up with that now. Having deep conversations in Germany, certainly the UK, where I'm based, people are catching up with where the US is now, and I think people are getting behind this common standard. And it's, even though a hospital, sometimes we go to a hospital and they're not yet FHIR enabled, they're not yet what we call e-source ready, so we have to sort of help them on that first piece of the journey, and it can feel like a bit of it. I mean, it's not a heavy lift, but there is certainly some work for them to do to map those FHIR resources across initially.
Is there resistance to that?
There is, yeah.
So that's because that's an infrastructure investment that they must make
Yeah, and resource. Yeah, it's to a degree. I mean, but the point is, yes, once it's done, and then there's EHR to EDC is just one use case that it can be applied for. There's a host of other ways in which that can be utilized, and then they can start sweating that asset that they've basically got in the hospital, and it becomes a much easier conversation for them to take to the executive committees and the leadership teams to release the funding for that, and it just starts the ROI just gets bigger and bigger and bigger for the hospitals. The sponsors then get to benefit, and they get to essentially, sort of sweat that asset that everybody's created to get the cleaner data, and the patients benefit. So, we don't have to try all that hard to kind of sell the concept into hospitals because it's just so blindingly obvious they need to do it. But it's only possible because of FHIR, quite literally.
Yeah.
So.
Steve, anything to add to that?
No, I was just thinking about your problem of the hospitals and in the EMRs and not being ready yet. That's changing, right? In the U.S., FHIR isn't just a good idea; it's the law, right? Each piece of significant healthcare or health data legislation that we've seen passed in the past decade, there's been some component in there somewhere that requires the use of FHIR as a standard for certifications, right? And that's being followed by vendors, and that's now being followed by health plans and even providers, right?
Yeah.
The U.S. government recognized that the FHIR standard is, if you're going to hold somebody to something, there does have to be a standard.
That's right. That's right. And I look at how some of the other accelerators, particularly the payers, have pushed, they've got these implementation guides with normative FHIR. They're well baked, they're well tested, and now they're in legislation. And when we were talking earlier with the TADOS folks about what's happening in Europe, and they're trying to sort of figure out what their rules are going to be, and I think that there's a tremendous opportunity here to sort of band together and see how FHIR can work to enable some of the projects. One of the things that we did with the VIB, and again, this is also on the website, but there were 6 major federal projects going on at various agencies, various federal agencies. And we mapped each of these use cases to which ones could this help accelerate? So we have this workflow built with FHIR, and oh, look, this is data you're trying to move for this project and that project. And so we tried to take them back in that way to be able to really show how these workflows can support many things, right, all at once. And, Bev, I want to give you the opportunity here to weigh in. I'm not sure, it's sort of a chicken and an egg thing. Do we wait until the European space is fully decided? I think it's a both and, work together to identify those use cases. But, maybe talk about how you think this type of testing and demonstration can support some of these major infrastructure initiatives in Europe.
Yeah, certainly. We talked a little bit about the use case we demonstrated in VIB, and that was around, looking at that medicinal information on FHIR, and that is global. It is something too that when you look at, FHIR and the various accelerators, there is quite a bit of global participation. But again, it does underpin, ways to be able to interoperate and exchange data, to and from patients, preserving, that privacy and security, but then also being able to traverse, the various stakeholders. When you think about healthcare, there are so many stakeholders with that patient in the center, but be able to interchange that data. And in the U.S., as we mentioned, it's gone through an evolution. There was first, some regulations, and it was kind of the carrot and the stick to say, hey, everybody within healthcare institutions and hospitals, operating these EHRs, and also, patient, there was a lot of third-party apps, for patients and all. They said, hey, go to open standards so we can interoperate, across this. When a patient comes and asks for their data, they need to be able to get it. Don't send them down to a seller and say, go get a CD cut or charge money for it. So that was one step. Then we saw, as you mentioned, a lot of the retailers started to get on board. And again, there was a bit more carrot and stick, combination with some policies that were coming out and so on. But we saw retailers start to interchange data, and then the payers jumped on board. Payers are definitely looking to see, they just actually implemented kind of these health insurer cards. In the States, that's a big thing where patients end up getting, these cards sent to them. Instead, there's more of this universal card going through like an ID.me or trusted, security, kind of like Clear, what we experience at airports. And now, of course, pharma, from a research perspective, because those patients are asking to be able to get that data. They want to know, hey, what was the results of the research I participated in? So, I think a lot of these areas where these FHIR accelerators were, certainly underpin a lot of where, the European health data space is going as well. So I would definitely say, from a FHIR perspective, it is something that helps us kind of translate and move data across these various stakeholders, look at that patient more holistically. And then, one of the things I hear a lot in research is, we use OMOP. We use a lot of different standards. And one thing I always say is this is not a substitute for OMOP. We have some FHIR to OMOP mapping, or actually the other way around, which is easier to do. We have, this coexistence of these various, ontologies as well. But, the key is FHIR interoperates with those. So I say FHIR is in addition to, not a substitute of these standards as well.
Great. Dan, do you want to have anything to add to that?
Yeah, it's interesting referencing OMOP as well. I was having this conversation just yesterday with various people, and it's not an either or. It's definitely a both that are required because they do two different things. And it was interesting earlier as well, watching the work that had gone on, which was mapping FHIR to OMOP, right? I'm definitely interested in how it can be done the other way, because I'm often coming across hospitals in Europe who have utilizing OMOP in a major way, and that's a great model for research for all sorts of different reasons. But to have FHIR that can be sat on top of that, not to replace it, opens up all of those same possibilities. So I've got a ton of conversations ongoing right now that are in that sort of realm, and I think it will just open up a whole new room of possibility for us. Once we really crack that, and other models as well.
Awesome. All right, so I'd like to open it up to the audience. If you guys have any questions for these guys, like we've got, I think about 15 minutes left. Is that right?
About 5.
Oh, 5. We have 5 minutes left. Okay, we have 5 minutes for questions. Chop chop. No questions? We were very thorough. All right. Any final thoughts from our panelists? Steve, maybe you go first.
Final thoughts from me. No one will get to leave the room. Yeah, I think just going back to not being able to say enough about hearing what the challenges are today. FHIR it's just a natural fit, right? And so I know we've kind of morphed this Vulcan discussion into a general
sure
rah-rah FHIR,
yeah.
right? But I mean, if we haven't made it abundantly clear, the data type itself, right, is you get your FHIR data out of OMOP, and now you can move it to another system. But that's the same data that when we saw the picture of the app earlier, right? It's the same data, right? You can render it right on the screen. You can, do all the sorts of things that you would expect to do with JSON data. So, yeah, I'll go all day.
Yay, fire.
Yeah, fire.
In summary. Dan?
Yeah, I mean, my final thoughts really are that I just want to do anything that I can to beat the drum for that and raise awareness with particularly with hospitals of the possibilities and the benefits that are available if they start heading down this path. I know we had an event in London last May that was really well attended by British hospitals. Just an educational format, and we had some great speakers. And I'd love to do something similar in Europe, just to help sort of just drive awareness, basically. The more the merrier. The more people that know about this, I think it's essential.
Fantastic. So, Bev, I'm not sure you can see in the room, but it looks like we have a couple questions, so I'm going to hold your final thoughts.
And it's not even a question.
All right, I'll hold it.
Just an example from the real world. I'm running a project here in Denmark called the OSCAR project, stands for One Stop Shop for Clinical Research. And part of what we're doing is using 2 different EHR systems to map oncology data to OMOP standard. Now, one hospital insists on using their own data integration platform. There's no FHIR in it, so it's very manual oncologists, clinicians, and data scientists. And the other hospital, they have a FHIR-based data integration platform, which we're just starting up. So I'm looking forward to show those results, because I think it will be a very, very clear difference in productivity in itself. And the other thing is, of course, what we would bring to the open source community by the experience that we gain as well once we do the mapping towards OMOP standard. So,
Sounds great.
One thing I would add to that as well is it would be fantastic. There's what's called Codex, which is another FHIR accelerator. And what they do is they take FHIR and they kind of templatize, FHIR for some of the exchange. There is one focus on oncology called MCode. And it would be great if you could share some of the learnings that you have with MCode. I think there's going to be a lot of, dovetailing. Crossover.
For sure. Thanks, Bev. Did you have a question?
I have 2 questions, maybe. We had practical experience where there was a demand for a data warehouse, mainly of imagery data from different formats. I didn't see any reference to FHIR in this environment. So
Sure.
I suppose it is outside.
Yeah.
It's mainly dealt with by DICOM or
I can answer that, and I think it will actually lend some credibility to just how excited we are about FHIR. It doesn't solve every problem, right? And analytics, analytics and warehousing, they're still, FHIR is a wonderful transactional, data. It's great for transfer. It's good for drilling in and getting one thing out. But if you're looking to do traditional business intelligence and warehousing, there are other ways to do it. It's kind of like, OMOP's not going away. Whatever your favorite BI tool is not going away. But getting the FHIR data is normalized enough, and it's easy enough to get it into name your favorite BI tool, right? Or name your favorite cloud service. And so that's what we tend to, when we're doing like population health type analytics, move all of that transactional data into a warehouse.
Yeah, thank you. The second question is, how do we much better, because I have the feeling I'm wondering that the European health data space at the moment has no reference to FHIR, but it seems that de facto FHIR is imposing itself. So how do we make those 2 threads to converge? What is the hurdle? What is the barrier to that? How every stakeholder here can contribute?
Bev, do you have a thought on that?
I would say the more everyone gets involved, we talked a little bit about, where you can get information about the Vulcan Accelerator home. Each of these FHIR accelerators, has a home. I mentioned, global participation, but there's also been, program of work initiated. I talked a little bit about the medicinal product information. under Vulcan, there's an implementation guide for API exchanges, medicinal product information. There's also, quite a bit of other information around quality information and so on. I would say both for developers and non-developers, get involved in these work groups. And through the Connect-a-thons and through some of these demonstrations, it would be a great way to be able to demonstrate, how these various accelerators underpin TDOS. And I think in particular with the real world data, there is a use case under the Vulcan Accelerator where there's been a lot of progress made and more to be done. But I would say, involvement, there does tend to be a lot of collaboration between these various consortiums and groups. So we try not to replicate work. So there is quite a bit of sharing and information sharing and, being able to demonstrate the value.
I agree, and I think it's important to note too the way that it worked in the U.S. for the payers was that the payers all came together and banded together with HL7 and built these implementation guides without any regulatory requirement, right? They were working together to build a standard to solve their problems. And as regulatory policy moved forward, they were then able to sort of infuse their learnings from the first round of testing of those implementation guides into what should be. And it's not a quick, prescriptive, here's how you should do it, right? It's a matter of industry coming together. And I think that's why it's so important that folks get engaged, right? Is because we've got to build the IGs, figure out what works, and be able to lend credible evidence from things like testing and pilots back to the government so the government sees the value in including it in policy.
Yeah, I was about to say exactly that same thing. I think the benefits need to be brought to the attention of the policymakers. It's the law in the States, quite literally, and that's okay.
But only because it was proven out first, right? It was first the accelerators building the IGs, explaining the use cases, demonstrating their progress and success and learnings.
You don't have to go all the way to the U.S. though. I mean, we're seeing adoption in the U.K. The NHS is getting on board. We've been doing more and more projects over there.
And how was that process? Is it NHS led or is it industry led or both?
It was the individual trusts in the hospitals themselves, right? Eventually, the technologists kind of just started doing stuff, right, and said this is the way to do it, or they started using existing tools that were out there. That is just, this does this in FHIR, right? And it's hard to argue against it.
For sure, for sure. Right. Did you have a follow-on?
Yeah, just to say that what I witnessed nowadays is that there is a strong push from the healthcare professionals in the hospitals. They don't want to re-enter data twice. But when you are engaged in a project with them, then you face the IT department of the hospital, then you face the software editor of the EMR, and none of them, they are FHIR compliant. And there you start a very long journey. And I think that the push from the regulatory, maybe at the national level in the various countries of Europe would be helpful. To create a higher awareness, because we had, for instance, 2 days ago in Paris, a full session on the European health data space, and I don't think that anyone has mentioned FHIR or whatever in relation with FHIR. It's a pity.
Absolutely.
Because it's a theoretical.
Right, until you demonstrate it in a pilot. That's, I think, what the VIB set out to do, right?
I'm happy to be here today because we will convey very much, of course, this message.
Absolutely. Thank you. Go beat the FHIR drum for sure. Well, folks, I think we're about at time. Thank you all so very much for your time and attention today. Thank you to each of our panelists for dialing in. I'm not sure what time it is where Bev is, but I think it's pretty early. So I really,
early.
I appreciate you so much. All right, well, I think that's a wrap.